In the name of the one, holy, and undivided Trinity, amen. Have a seat. God is tired. Can you hear it in this reading? I'm going to paraphrase God's conversation with Nathan from this morning's lesson. I have been traveling around in a tent with you guys for a long time. I didn't complain, but seriously, it's time for a real house. Go and tell David, build me a real house. Foundation and everything, the works. Remember? I took you from nowhere, made you pretty famous. Now it's time to give back. We're planting together. Now, this is pretty understandable. No one wants to be wandering forever. It's good to have solid walls around you and a structure you can trust. There's a little bit of the three little pigs in this story too, right? It's easy to knock down a tent. It's a bit harder to knock down cedar. A temple is a whole other proposition. But contrast this conversation with the one the messenger has with Mary in today's gospel reading. First, it's an invitation, not an order. The messenger announces, but does not leave until she has thought it over and consented. This is pretty important and is illustrative of the strangeness of this encounter, because God's approach between David and Mary has changed quite a bit. And there are things to be learned, I think, in this shift in approach. The first thing I think about is the sheer riskiness of this proposition. People are a lot riskier than buildings. A building is a thing. It has dimensions. It's measurable, it's stable, made well, it is literally grounded. A person is flexible and mobile. A person is made of trillions of cells, which can break down and die. A person is a body, and bodies get cancer and get sick and miscarry. Bodies are resilient and fragile, both, but they're always relentlessly needy. They need water and air and light and food. Buildings need maintenance, but you don't have to feed them every day. For God to choose a home that is a body, that is Mary's body in particular, is a horrifying risk. It involves a lot of trust. Because Mary's body in particular was not safe. She was a vulnerable young woman in an occupied territory. We know what often happens to vulnerable young women in occupied territories. She had no guards, no soldiers, no palace, no guarantees of physical safety, no guarantees for food and clean water, if we're counting. And God placed the entirety of God's trust in that one body. I have to think that it must have been something to do with who she was, right? If all God needed was a body with a womb, there were plenty of those to choose from. Most of them better fed and cared for, some with better weapons. But God chose Mary. I have to think it was because of some particular characteristic of her being, of her will. We talk a lot about Mary's most notable personality trait as submission. But submission as a general practice doesn't keep you or your baby very safe in a dangerous world. You have to be able to defend that baby. God discerned something in Mary's will. Something about Mary's courage, Mary's bared teeth, Mary's fight that could keep this baby safe. And perhaps God had learned something. Since the building of that temple was around 830 BCE, that temple was destroyed. As reliable as buildings are compared to bodies, they too can be demolished. Perhaps God was willing to risk a person after seeing what happened to the building. It also means that God knows what it's like to have one's home be a site of violence and to be cast out. What does it mean to start to trust people rather than buildings? We have an intuitive sense of this too, right? We do this when we think about the church. For most of us, when we say, I'm going to church, we mean, I'm going to get in my car, drive to a parking lot, park my car, and enter a building. Or walk to a building, if you're me. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not bad. That's just how we use this language. But we also have this layer of understanding of the church as us. Right? The organic, living, breathing bodies in the room right now. We're the church. We have a building, but we're the church. And that means this interesting thing, which is that the church disperses at the dismissal. You know the old saying, wherever you go, there you are. Wherever you go, there's the church. When we leave here, the church spreads out all over the city. Isn't that nice to think about? Everywhere. This week, just take a second and think about where the church is. Christmas shopping, or making dinner, or napping, sparkling, all over the city. And this understanding of the church means that God trusts us the way that God trusted Mary. Even with our needy bodies, our troubles, our aches and pains, and our recalcitrant wills, we are trusted with this story, this word, this possibility, this hope. It can be harder for us to have faith in one another than in the building. It's scarier to trust people instead of controllable material things that can't talk back. But I think it is one way we are invited to be in the image of God in this season, at this particular point. To offer ourselves to one another. To trust one another when trust can be hard. When most of us in this room have 5 excellent reasons to never trust another human being again, ever. To go soft towards people, toward bodies, instead of rigid. I wonder to whom you could offer the gift of your trust this week. To assume goodness in them and good intent. Offer them the benefit of the doubt. These last few precious days together before the birth of the holy baby, let us offer each other generosity in our shared fragility. Let us bare our necks to one another and to those we meet. For Mary, in service to love.